I remember the moment like a film frame burned into memory. The office smelled like it always did, faint ink from the printers, cheap floor polish, and someone's leftover cinnamon oatmeal in the break room. Rows of humming monitors flickered with spreadsheets, code, and Slack messages no one actually read. Sunlight sliced through the blinds, casting stripes across my desk. It all looked the same. But everything had changed, because the man standing at the front of the room that morning wasn't our boss. Not really. He was our boss's son, Brandon Wells, and he had just inherited the company. "Good morning, everyone," he said, clapping his hands like he was about to give a TED Talk nobody asked for. "As of today, I'm the new CEO of BrightSphere Digital." A polite round of applause echoed through the space. It wasn't enthusiasm, it was survival instinct. I didn't clap, not because I was bitter. Not yet, but because I already knew what kind of leader Brandon would be. You see, I had been at BrightSphere for 17 years, longer than most of the furniture. I was hired back when the company was a scrappy little startup run by his father, Charles Wells, a gruff, old-school businessman who couldn't code a single line but knew how to recognize people who could. He was tough but fair. He believed in loyalty, and when he handed the company off to his son after a stroke, I believe it broke his heart. Because Brandon? He was different, flashier, slick, raised on power lunches and pitch decks. The kind of guy who thinks charisma is a substitute for competence. He strutted through our office that day in a designer suit like he owned the oxygen. I watched him flash his fake smile as he said something about streamlining and modernization. The usual buzzwords that mean one thing: layoffs. And as we transition into a more agile, forward-thinking future, he announced, "Some of you may not fit the new vision of BrightSphere." I felt the quiet ripple of glances from my team. Everyone knew Brandon had never liked me. And it wasn't because I was bad at my job. Quite the opposite. I'd once caught a massive flaw in the code he'd submitted during a summer internship, a hack job he barely showed up for. He was careless, but protected. I cleaned up the mess without ratting him out. I should have. That afternoon, the email arrived. Subject line: meeting, 4 p.m. CEO's office. No further details. I didn't panic. Yet, I gathered my notebook, straightened my shoulders, and walked into his glass-walled lair. He didn't look up, just said, "Sit." I sat. He closed his laptop with theatrical flair, leaned back, and gave me the kind of smirk that makes your skin crawl. "Evelyn," he began, "you've been here a long time." 17 years, I said. "Exactly," he said, as if that were a punchline. "Too long. You're great with legacy code. But we need future thinking. Agile minds. Fresh energy." I held his gaze, didn't flinch. He leaned forward. "I'm not spending another dime on someone coasting on old infrastructure. You're done here." I blinked once. My heart pounded, but my face didn't betray it. "Got it," I said quietly. He looked stunned, like he expected tears or rage. When I didn't perform the drama he was fishing for, he tossed in a final jab. "HR will contact you about severance." I paused at the door. "You might want to read the contract your father signed," I said, specifically the section labeled Emergency System Governance. He frowned. I didn't wait for a reply. When I got home, I made tea, sat at my desk, and opened a document I hadn't looked at in 3 years. It was the contract Charles Wells had drawn up when he promoted me to Chief Systems Architect. We worked closely back then. He trusted me to modernize the core tech infrastructure of BrightSphere. But he also understood the risk of giving that much power to one person. So we built a failsafe. It was buried in the middle of the contract. The kind of clause no fresh out of business school CEO would bother reading. It gave me final authority over all internal systems, databases, portals, security layers, access control, if I was ever terminated without just cause or proper severance. Which I had just been. I wasn't angry. I was resolute. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reminding people like Brandon that systems don't run on charisma. They run on the people who build them. The next morning, I logged into the admin console. My credentials still worked. Brandon hadn't reassigned anything. HR hadn't contacted me. No formal offboarding. He really thought I'd vanish like a whisper. I hovered my cursor over the emergency lockdown protocol. Then clicked. Instantly, the system responded. Employee logins deactivated. Payroll software access denied. Internal messaging offline. CRM frozen. Admin dashboards inaccessible. Vendor portals locked. I didn't delete anything. That would be illegal. I simply invoked my rights. The company wasn't broken, but it was frozen, waiting for someone to admit the mistake. Around noon, the text started. Leo Torres, one of the senior IT guys I used to mentor, messaged, "Hey, what's happening? All systems are glitching. Brandon's freaking out." Then came a flood of emails and calls. From support staff, from marketing, even from the front desk. I ignored them. Then Brandon called. I let it ring, twice. On the third try, I answered. "Evelyn speaking." "What the hell did you do?" he screamed. Calmly, I replied, "Follow the contract. You should read it sometime." "You shut down the whole company." "No, I restricted access." "That's different." "You're insane." "No, I'm prepared." Silence. Then his voice dropped, almost pleading. "How'd I fix this?" "You don't. You're not authorized to." "What do you want?" It was tempting to demand money, reinstatement, or revenge, but I wanted none of that. "I want you to admit you were wrong," I said, publicly, not just to me, to everyone. He laughed bitterly. "You're serious?" "I'm done being invisible," I said. "You want your company back? You fix what you broke." Then I hung up. By the third day, Bright Sphere wasn't just in trouble, it was in crisis. I watched from the quiet of my apartment as the digital heart of the company flatlined. Not from malice, but from design. The protections I built weren't meant to punish. They were meant to defend. Brandon had never realized that because he never asked how the systems actually worked. He just assumed everything would keep running after I was gone. Payroll failed first. Employees stopped getting direct deposits. Then the client communication portal froze. Contracts couldn't be uploaded. Reports stopped syncing. Even the coffee machines in the executive wing, which were linked to the internal network, blinked an error code. The silence of a broken system is louder than any alarm. Then came the board. Around 4 p.m. that afternoon, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Evelyn Monroe speaking." "Miss Monroe, this is Marissa Clay from Brightsphere's board of directors. We need to speak with you immediately." Her tone was professional, crisp, but there was tension under it. The sound of someone trying to stay composed as the floor crumbled beneath them. "Of course," I said. "When?" "Within the hour. Video conference." "I'll be ready." I joined the call in a black blazer and quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't come from a title, but from knowing your worth. On the screen were 6 board members, flanked by the Bright Sphere logo behind them like a courtroom seal. In the middle, slightly slouched, was Brandon. Gone was the cocky posture. The silk suit. His tie was askew. His face pale. He looked like a kid who'd finally realized the training wheels were off, and the bike was halfway down a hill. Marissa opened the meeting. "Miss Monroe, we understand there's been a disruption to our internal systems." "Yes," I said simply. "You were the architect behind those systems, correct? For the past 6 years." "Yes. And according to the contract co-signed by our founder, Charles Wells, you had the authority to restrict access in the event of wrongful termination without severance?" I nodded. "Correct." Brandon shifted in his seat, as if preparing to interrupt. "And were you terminated without cause or severance?" Marissa asked. "I was." "I didn't think she'd," Brandon began. But Marissa cut him off with a look sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Wells," she said, "did you review the executive contracts before issuing that termination?" He swallowed, loudly. "I thought it was boilerplate. I didn't read the whole thing." There it was, the moment of truth. One of the other board members closed his eyes and exhaled like a man bracing for a crash. Marissa turned back to me. "Are the systems deleted?" "No," I said. "All data is secure." I followed protocol exactly. This is a lockout, not a breach. And what would it take to restore access? I took a breath. "A formal retraction of my termination," I said. "A signed letter acknowledging the breach of contract. And a public apology from Mr. Wells, to the staff and the board, for his mishandling of the company's infrastructure and people." Brandon stared at me, red-faced, like he couldn't believe I dared to ask. "You want me to humiliate myself?" He spat. "No," I said. "I want accountability." Marissa leaned back, fingers steepled. "We'll be in touch shortly." That night, I walked through my neighborhood in the rain. Not the heavy, dramatic kind, but the quiet drizzle that makes everything feel hushed and clean. It soaked into my coat, into my hair, into the very bones of the last 17 years. I had done everything they asked. And more. I stayed late. I trained others. I made systems bulletproof. And in the end, I was still considered disposable. That was the ache I couldn't shake. Not rage, just a deep, bone-level weariness from being invisible until everything broke. The following day, I got another call, but not from the board. It was Charles Wells, the founder, Brandon's father. Evelyn, he said softly, it's been too long. Mr. Wells, I replied, genuinely surprised. I didn't expect to hear from you. I should have called sooner. I've been recovering, but Marissa updated me. I've read everything, including our contract. There was a pause. I gave you that clause because I trusted you, he said, and I can see now how necessary it was. Thank you, I said, quietly. That means a lot. Would you be willing to meet with me? He asked. Privately. No board, no Brandon, just a conversation. I agreed. We met the next afternoon at a small, old cafe near the river. He looked older, frailer, but the sharpness in his eyes was still there. I gave him everything, Charles said after we sat. But I never taught him how to earn it. He looked down at his trembling hands wrapped around a ceramic cup. You were the one person I knew would protect what we built. And now, you're the only one who can help fix it. I said nothing. I let the silence sit between us like an old friend. I'm not asking you to forgive Brandon, he continued. I'm asking you to help the people, the employees, the foundation. My jaw tightened. If I come back, I said, I want it to mean something. He nodded. I figured you would. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal, not for a return, not even for a promotion. For partnership, co-ownership, permanent rights to the infrastructure I built. A public acknowledgement of my contribution. Full authority to oversee the transition to new leadership. Brandon will be stepping down. Charles added. He doesn't know it yet. But the board is moving forward. I stared at the paper. Not because I didn't believe it, but because for the first time, someone had put in writing what I was worth. The day I returned to Bright Sphere, I didn't wear a power suit. No silk blouse. No hard red lipstick meant to intimidate. Just a clean navy shirt, slacks, and the same calm confidence I'd worn that day Brandon fired me. But this time, I wasn't walking in as someone trying to prove herself. I was walking in as someone whose value had finally been seen. The board convened in the main conference room. Charles was there, seated at the end, quiet but present. Brandon sat slumped in his usual chair, though this time he looked more like an intern being scolded for misusing the copy machine. Marissa greeted me with a tight nod. Miss Monroe, she said, thank you for joining us again. Of course. She gestured to the head of the table. This time, the seat was for me. We've reviewed your terms, she said, and we accept them. Officially, your termination has been rescinded. A letter of acknowledgement has been signed and filed. You are hereby reinstated as Chief Systems Architect and, per the new agreement, as a partner in Brightsphere's executive leadership. A folder was passed to me. Real signatures, legal stamps, recognition. Then she turned toward Brandon. Mr. Wells has also prepared a statement. Brandon didn't stand. He didn't even make eye contact. I mishandled the situation, he said. I underestimated the infrastructure, the leadership, and you. Evelyn. Silence. I apologize for the damage I caused, he added, stiff and rehearsed. It wasn't emotional, but it was public, and for someone like Brandon, who ran on ego, even that was a kind of surrender. I nodded, accepting it, but I wasn't done. There's one more condition, I said, standing slowly. I'll restore full access to the system. But I want every engineer on my former team granted permanent employment status. Salary increases to match market rates. And back pay for every hour they spent trying to fix what Brandon broke. The board murmured. Marissa blinked. Charles leaned forward. Done, he said without hesitation. That was the final piece. I opened my laptop, logged into the admin dashboard, and typed in the reset sequence. Systems flickered back to life. Servers pulsed. Portals unlocked. From the outside, it looked like the crisis had ended. But inside, something had shifted forever. Afterward, I returned to my old office, just to see it one last time. The desk was still there. My nameplate had been removed. But the chair still creaked the way I remembered. On the bookshelf were the reference guides I used to lend out to interns. A drawer still held a mint tin I'd forgotten about. It wasn't nostalgia I felt. It was release. I didn't belong here anymore, not because I wasn't worthy, but because I had outgrown it. That afternoon, I met with the IT team, some veterans, some new hires still finding their rhythm. I looked at each of them and said something I wish someone had told me years ago. No one should ever be a single point of failure, not even me. And I meant it. Together, we outlined a transition plan. Not just a handover, but a full restructuring, redundancies, documentation, mentorship tracks, Systems that didn't rely on invisible labor to function. I wasn't building an empire this time. I was building resilience. A week later, Brandon moved out of the executive suite. No speech, no goodbye, just a quiet shuffle of cardboard boxes and avoidance. Leo, one of the IT seniors, found me in the hallway. Did you expect him to say anything? He asked. No, I said, but I hoped. Leo gave a half smile. You know, the rest of us? We were watching, every single step, and we weren't just impressed. Evelyn, we were proud. That stopped me. Proud? I repeated. He nodded. You stood up, not just for yourself, but for all of us. For every one of us who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, passed over for someone with a louder voice and a shinier suit. You gave us hope. I blinked hard, trying not to let it show. But something cracked in my chest, something I hadn't even known was frozen. Thank you, I whispered. He grinned. No, thank you. That weekend, I went somewhere I hadn't been in a long time. My parents' graves. They were both public school teachers. The kind who stayed after class for kids who needed extra help. Who believed in showing up, working hard, and making something out of nothing. When I got my job at Bright Sphere, they were the first ones to celebrate. They never saw me become a partner. But I carried them with me into every boardroom, every system launch, every hard-earned success. I sat between the headstones and let my fingers rest on the grass. I did it, I whispered. Not for Brandon, not even for Bright Sphere. For every engineer who's ever been told they're replaceable. For every woman whose ideas got claimed in a meeting. For every worker who stayed late so someone else could leave early and shine. I sat there for hours, letting the wind wrap around me. Letting go. A month after the systems came back online, I submitted my final documentation and officially stepped away from Bright Sphere. It wasn't a dramatic exit. No farewell cake, no speeches. Just a clean transfer of knowledge. A short thank you note to the board. And a calm walk out the glass doors I had walked through nearly every day for 17 years. What came next wasn't planned. But it was long overdue. I started small, just a single rented room in a co-working space near the city's edge. A place with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that gurgled like it had bronchitis. But it was mine. Monroe Systems. That's what I named it. Not because I needed my name on the door, but because for so long, my name had been hidden in the background of someone else's. Within 2 weeks, I had my first contract, helping a mid-sized nonprofit modernize their data protection protocols. The week after that, a former Bright Sphere client reached out. Then another. Then a city department. Word got around fast. Not about the drama, about the systems, and the woman who built them to last. But I didn't want Monroe Systems to just be a tech consultancy. I wanted it to be the kind of place I wished I'd had when I started out. So I hired carefully. My first team members weren't rock stars or influencers. They were the quiet ones. The overlooked. The people who had been passed over because they didn't look the part. A former intern with ADHD who thrived in chaos. A single dad with a tech bootcamp certificate and raw talent. A woman in her 50s who hadn't coded in years but had a mind like a steel trap. We built something real. Not flashy, not corporate, but solid. One Friday afternoon, during a team lunch of Thai takeout and laughter, one of the younger engineers asked me, "How did you know it was time to start your own thing?" I paused, sipping from my water bottle. I didn't, I said. I just knew it was time to stop being invisible. They nodded, thoughtful. Then someone changed the subject to game dev and the moment passed. But inside, something clicked. That was it. That's all most of us want. Not fame, not domination, just to be seen. 2 months after opening, Monroe Systems moved into a proper office. Clean white walls, desks we built ourselves, a whiteboard no one was afraid to write on. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I gave a short speech. Not the kind you rehearse for investors. The kind you give to people you believe in. I built my career in shadows. I said, I was called just an employee. Overlooked, underpaid, ignored, but I kept showing up. I kept building. I looked around at my team. Fresh eyes, sharp minds. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: your worth is not determined by who sees you. It's determined by what you build when no one's watching. The applause wasn't thunderous. It didn't need to be. It was real. I kept things low-key. I didn't post about Brandon. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. Some stories are louder when told in silence. But one afternoon, a message landed in my inbox. Simple, unassuming. Hey, it's been a while. Can I call? Brandon. I stared at the message. Then picked up the phone. His voice was different, flat, no smugness, no spin. Evelyn, he said, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. You're not wrong, I said calmly. Pause. I just wanted to say. I was wrong. About you. About everything. I said nothing. He kept going. I didn't understand the systems. I thought it was all replaceable. I thought loyalty was optional. But it's not. It never was. I said. I've lost everything. He added. Even my father doesn't return my calls. That's not my problem. Brandon. I know. He whispered. I just needed to say I'm sorry. For real. For firing you. For disrespecting you. For not even reading the contract. You didn't deserve that. I let the words sit there. Then finally, I said. Apology accepted. But don't mistake that for forgetting. I wouldn't dare. And just like that, the call ended. I didn't feel vindicated. Or triumphant. Just whole. That summer, I mentored my first full cohort of young engineers. I didn't just teach them how to write code. I taught them how to read contracts. How to set boundaries. How to ask for raises. How to say no. How to demand respect without losing their humanity. Because tech skills are one thing. Self-worth is another. And both are needed to survive in a world that forgets people behind the screens. I heard Bright Sphere survived. Barely. Charles finally stepped down. The board brought in a new CEO, a woman named Nina Rhodes. Former cybersecurity lead at a federal agency. Smart, quiet, exactly the kind of person Brandon would have overlooked. She called me once, asked for guidance during her transition. All I said was, take care of your people, and they'll take care of your company. She took that to heart. Bright Sphere started to recover, not because of rebranding, but because someone finally remembered what made it work: the people. As for Brandon, he disappeared from the tech world. No fancy LinkedIn job updates. No podcast interviews. Just gone. I heard through a mutual contact that he lives in a small apartment outside the city now. Quiet, alone. No one calls him CEO anymore. But my name? It's on invoices now, on project briefs, on client testimonials, on the glass door of a company I built from nothing but hard lessons and harder nights. Evelyn Monroe. Not a forgotten employee. Not a cautionary tale. But a builder. A leader. A woman who rewrote her own ending, and made sure no one else had to disappear to be seen.